The International Schools Network is an online platform for international educators to really form community, to build connections with each other, and for us to really spotlight brilliant international educators around the world, what they're doing in their schools, and to share best practice. So this event today, How Do Great Teachers Become Great Leaders, is an opportunity for us to ask some brilliant senior leaders in international education about their experiences and reflections on this. Many teachers find that their dedication to their students and school results in them taking on more and more responsibilities to provide the best outcomes. Many teachers find themselves in leadership positions without a lot of opportunity to develop and refine the skills needed to manage a team. So what are the skills needed for middle leadership, for senior leadership, and what do these roles really look like? What barriers are there, and how can we best overcome these? How can we support and encourage fantastic teachers into leadership positions? So we are delighted to invite you today to hear the insights from these brilliant international educators. So our guests include Glen Radojkovich, Nicki Williams, Philip Stainton, and Matt Hall. Our first session today is from Glen, who is Director of Education at Taleem. Glen has been in leadership positions for over 20 years. He was the former chairman of the IB Heads Association and chairman of Cambridge University International Examinations. Glen has been an advisor to ministries of education in 5 countries. And most recently, he is CEO and head of school in Dubai, where his school was a finalist in the IB School of the Year and was selected as one of the top 10 schools in Dubai as well. Welcome, Glen, and we're going to go over to you for your presentation.
Thanks very much, Claire. Really appreciate being invited to be on. I was going to do a brief introduction, and I'll do one anyway, just in terms of one of the elements that I wanted to sort of touch on. Obviously, experience sort of internationally, and I guess I wanted to show the breadth of different schools and different regions that I've worked in for those people who are joining perhaps from Asia, Middle East, and Australasia. I've put my contact details there. Happy to connect with people, happy to share ideas, happy to learn from you. So feel free to connect at some stage and keep the conversation going. I work with a group called Taleem Education currently, and the Director of Education in Dubai for that. Nicki Williams, who's also on the call, is another director from the same group and looks after our Abu Dhabi group. And she will talk more about that when she's introduced. The focus of the conversation, what I was asked to speak to, is identifying your passion, stepping forward into leadership. And so I guess for me, one of the things I wanted to touch on is the importance of passion and purpose in whatever it is you're doing. If you're moving from teaching into middle leadership, or from middle leadership into senior leadership, you'll notice that each of my slides, there's a quote. That's because hopefully you'll be able to take something away that's actually intelligent and useful, in case nothing that I say is. But John Maxwell is someone who I respect in terms of his leadership acumen, and he points out there, the great leaders' courage to fulfill their visions come from passion. It's not position. And I think that's an important thing to remember. You need to ensure that you're passionate about whatever it is that you're doing. A position doesn't give you the ability to be a successful leader, but your drive is what's going to fuel you in that development. I've thrown on Simon Sinek's sort of why circle. How the why is the big push from him. You all know about it. I'm not going to dive into it, but I do want to touch on the fact that it is as important to look at your why in leadership. Why do you want to move into leadership? What is it you're going to do, and how is it you're going to do it? As much as it is to identify that for an initiative or for a new development or for an organization, it's an important piece to understand our why. So in that regard, I think self-reflection and understanding purpose is key. I think unfortunately time isn't always afforded to us in order to do that. I think it's important for teachers or middle leaders to examine their current roles and what they're going to move into and what it is that drives them about their current roles before jumping into the next phase of leadership. Sometimes a person's not necessarily a fit for that new phase of leadership, and what they do currently, they do brilliantly, and sometimes you're better off staying in that area. So I think it's important to examine those elements, but also to loop back to the importance of loving whatever it is you're doing and what is going to drive you. In that, the self-assessment piece is key. Knowing yourself is everything, as Aristotle says, and I think it's important to ensure that you self-audit as a leader regularly. As a teacher, we often do this, but I think as leaders, sometimes there's a reluctancy to self-audit and to ask for feedback from your team, because there's a fear that it'll be seen as a negative, or that you'll be seen as not able to do something, and leaders have to know everything, apparently. So important to remember that the self-auditing process is working with your team to identify areas of development and then being strategic in order to remedy or address them. You know, in some instances, people will do PD for PD's sake, and I think we need to be strategic about the PD that we're doing, that we have to go beyond education sometimes in order to find the answers for whatever it is that you have as an area of development. But the self-assessment piece, the importance of understanding both where you are and how successful you're being as a leader in your current role, but also if I'm going to move into a role of a superintendent or a director, or if I'm going to move into a role of senior leadership from middle leadership, what skill sets am I going to require that are slightly different from the ones that I have now? And how strong do I feel I'm going to be with those? And what is it I have to do to be able to move on and improve on those? In that regard, I think professional networks are absolutely essential. Gail talks about the fact that your network is your net worth. And I think in education, in many respects, it is a big part of what you bring to the table. Certainly, you know, as you move through the different layers of leadership and education, you know, it becomes part of your network of teachers, your network of other leaders that you can bring to your organization, the network that you have in terms of staying abreast of technology and new initiatives that are coming forward is essential. Certainly any connections you have with regulatory authorities and your ability to strengthen those, or with ministries of education or groups internationally, are all part of what you bring to the table. So in that regard, I think it's really important to ensure you're always growing your network. And I don't just mean connecting and finding, you know, people on LinkedIn, but actually getting to know people, speaking to people and understanding what it is they do and how perhaps you can support them, and likewise how they can support you. I think when it comes to working with mentors, coaches, and others, it's important to work with those who are inspiring to you and who fuel your passion. And I think that's important in any role that you choose to be in or stay in. That you connect with those who, if you're not getting it from within your institution, and sometimes you don't, then you need to find other people outside of your organization who are going to add value to whatever it is you're doing, but to fuel your passion. Because if we look back to the beginning, that's everything in being successful. You've got to be passionate about it. And as I say, if you can't find the passion from the other leaders who you're working with, find other leaders internationally to support in that regard. I think certainly don't pigeonhole yourself either to just the education industry. I've been quite fortunate to work with some great people in education over time, and have learned massive amounts and continue to learn massive amounts from those people I work with. But I think it's equally important to connect with mentors in other industries, because they bring other perspectives that we haven't considered, other ways of innovating to the table. I've had great CEOs that I've worked with as mentors, from CEOs of Nike and other institutions and organizations, who have been a tremendous support to me in navigating leadership and the self-reflection piece, and understanding different skill sets, and how they would do things differently in corporate, which doesn't always transfer, but it is important to have those conversations and to understand different ways of doing things. And we're thinking, in addition, when we look at different roles, the perception versus reality of leadership is an important one to understand. Some people want to move through the ranks of leadership merely for that reason. Sometimes it's for the fiscal benefits that come with it. Sometimes it's because they want to be the best that they can be. There's all sorts of different motivations that people have. But I think the really important piece there is to understand what it is you're going to be moving to. If you speak to a grade 1 in your school about what the principal does, you'll get some interesting answers. If you speak to teachers, you'll get other answers. And if you speak to other principals, they'll probably be a bit more accurate in terms of the responsibilities that are required. So I think in that regard, it's important to have a deeper understanding, and the only way you get that is to speak to leaders about what they do and to ask the questions and to dive deeper into those aspects. And I think when you're taking on a new role or looking to move into a new role, then it's really important that you do that. If you're moving into a new senior leadership position within your own school, or moving into a new school, what are the parameters that exist for you in terms of autonomy. What will you have full control of? What won't you? What's decided by regulatory bodies of different countries and what aren't? What is left up to the board to drive and what isn't? So those sort of pieces are really, really important. And I also think when it comes to determining your direction and the things that you're going to focus on, focusing on personal stories is an important piece. What is the loss versus the impact? An absolutely essential piece in regards to determining what position you're going to move to. So, for example, if I'm moving out of the classroom and I love teaching, which I used to do, you miss the kids when you move out and move into a new space. There are other benefits in that hopefully you have a greater scope to influence others, but that loss versus impact piece is something you need to examine, and you need to determine whether you're okay with that, because not everyone is. Sometimes people move into different roles and they miss the kids too much. They want to go back to it. So try and examine from personal stories of others what is going to be a fit for you. Will your passion survive in that space? And ensure that you have a full understanding of the perception of the role versus the reality of the role. I think the last slide for me is going to focus on I guess the transition from middle to senior leadership and the skills that I think are essential there. Roosevelt talks about handling yourself, using your heart and handling others using your head and handling others using your heart. And I think the heart piece is in any role absolutely instrumental. Values and EQ, as we know, drive just about any organization. They're essential in being successful. Getting culture right is key. So focusing on that piece, I think, is fundamental. Skill enhancement, as I talked about before, is absolutely essential in order to drive forward and to fill those deficits that you have. I listened to an interesting podcast from Federer recently, Roger Federer, the tennis player, and he was talking about the fact that people constantly used to talk about his play during his career as seeming effortless. He was able to play so well that he hardly built up a sweat and beating his opponents. And he said it used to drive him absolutely insane because it was complete opposite of the reality. In fact, he had to put incredible effort in to fully understand his opponents, to play and to beat them. And though while it looked easy, the effort was immense. And I think the same is the case for great leaders. They don't rest on their laurels. They work particularly hard to ensure that they're well prepared for whatever it is they're doing. And it may look easy from time to time, but it's certainly not. I think the other piece that's key to remember is to ensure that you plant yourself in the right environment. Not every school is going to be a fit for you. So examine the space that you're going into, the organization that you're going into, the other leaders that potentially you're going to work with, and make sure that as you move into that new position, that it's a fit and the values align for you. And if you plant yourself in that sort of space, and if you have people who are prepared to support you in your leadership growth, then you've planted yourself in fertile soil and you'll be successful. And then the final piece, obviously, is that we never arrive at knowing it all. So it's a continual journey of learning. So those would be my 2 cents. I don't know if that's any use.
Thank you, Glenn. Yeah, no, it was fascinating. And yeah, thank you for kind of pulling all those pieces together for us and really covering some of the reasons why people might be here today. So we've got some questions. We've had an incredible response with our form for the amount of questions that we've received, more than we'll be able to get through. So I've just selected some of these then to ask you. First of all, I just want to mention as well that although I know many members would be happy for us to share their name and their school along with their question, some of the questions were a little bit challenging, so we thought it would probably best to keep them anonymous. So jumping in for the first question, what advice would you give someone starting at a new school coming in as a leader?
Yeah, look, I think for me, the new schools are fantastic spaces to work in, massively challenging, but often you find there's an immense bond that comes from working in a new school with the starting foundation team. But I think one of the key pieces that I would look to there is to understand the change cycle, to understand the different processes of change, and that when you start off, it's going to take time to norm your expectations and ways of working, and that it's not going to be perfect straight away. So understand the necessary slumps that have to occur as you build teams. The forming, norming, storming, performing curve that we look at in terms of change management is equally important in a new school. And I think sometimes people forget that and expect things to be fantastic from day one. You can't be there, in the same way. Someone that's been married for 27 years is going to be better than someone who's just on their first date in terms of understanding the needs of that other person. You get to a point of having a synergy that only occurs when you've gone through a lot of work to develop those sort of relationships and to understand what it is that you're going to do. And then clarity is the other piece with regards to the role, and expectations and positivity would probably be the third piece with a new school. It's a mighty challenge, but hugely rewarding. I recommend it to everybody to do at least once, not necessarily twice, but at least once.
Thank you. And time for just one more question. In your experience, what are some of the positive and negative aspects of leadership?
Positives are certainly sit around the opportunity to engage with a lot of people and see them at their best and see them grow. It's very similar on a larger and different scale to working with students, and the immense joy that you get from that when you see students succeed, and seeing teams succeed and other leaders succeed is certainly where you get a lot of joy, and the opportunity to have impact of change. If we got in this business, and I'll call it a business, but we got into the vocation because we love kids, most of us, and we want to make a difference for them. So if you have an opportunity for greater impact, then that's a positive thing, and that's certainly to be enjoyed. But it comes with some downsides. Downsides, the immense responsibility that carries, and that can be a heavy piece for a lot of us at times. And I think certainly that aspect of leadership keeps us up at night on many occasions, depending on where we go and where we are, and that there's a massive change in expectations and what people expect to see from you, and that can sometimes be tough for leaders. So I didn't talk about well-being. I'm sure someone else will at some point, but that's a challenge for leaders, and something we need to be mindful of.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so
much. I
just
realised I never shared my screen as well.
Don't worry.
Someone's making mistakes, and tell them.
Yeah, we can send out the slides as well to go alongside this afterwards. So really not to worry. Thank you, Glenn.
Thanks a million.
Thanks. Okay. We are now going to move on to our second speaker. And so we're going to be talking now with Nicki Williams. So I'm just going to move down on my screen as well. Okay, so Nicki Williams is Director of Charter Schools at Taleem. Nicki brings over 2 decades of enriching experience in international education, where she's worn many hats, from teaching to leadership across schools with diverse curricula, a Bachelor of Education, National Professional Qualification of Headship, and an MA in Educational Leadership. Nicki's educational journey is a testament to her dedication to learning and growth. She's been instrumental in the launch of 8 new schools, a journey that speaks volumes about her leadership and vision. Welcome, Nicki.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Can hear you. How are you?
Good. I'm sorry. I should have shortened that introduction.
Yeah,
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. Welcome to everyone. I'm delighted to be here. I'm so passionate about developing leaders, particularly middle leaders, and those people new to senior leadership. As Claire said, I have opened a number of schools across the UAE, and with that, you're establishing new teams, setting expectations. So a lot of pressure comes with that. I started out my educational career, sort of stumbled into an educational career, let's say, when you get to that sort of pivotal time and you're 18 going, who am I going to be in life? And really not knowing where I was going to go, and then ending up joining a school as a teaching assistant and absolutely loving it. I really enjoyed working with children. I love seeing the impact that I was making, and it sort of just led into where I am today. I moved up through the ranks, and I was a strong teacher. I always couldn't have a student in my class that failed, because that would mean I failed and I couldn't possibly fail. So all of that sort of puts you in the forefront when people are looking at middle leadership and you know, who are going to be the front runners for the new positions and so on. Your impact in the classroom is obviously going to be a part of that. So I moved into head of department roles, deputy heads, head of school, and eventually principal. And you know, the organization that I've worked in for the past 3 years, I have been promoted 3 times. It is speaking to the absolute growth of Taleem over the time that I've been with the company as well. But I've worked with some amazing leaders, and I've worked with some absolutely atrocious leaders. And I think alongside that, you really do learn quite a lot about who you want to be as a leader, the things that you have witnessed and encountered and think, I never want to be that person. And then likewise, when I think about a mentor working with a head of primary who was just exceptional to me and really was a mentor and set a benchmark on standards and ethical practice and, you know, making sure that there was fairness and equality always at the forefront. And, you know, keeping your moral compass being the children and the impact in the classroom. So, yeah, that's a little bit about my trajectory in my career.
Oh, thank you, Nicki. Thank you for sharing that with us, and incredible things that you've achieved throughout your career. So we're going to delve straight into our questions, and a theme of lots of the questions that we received, it did stand out, was a question about imposter syndrome. So I wanted to start with that first. Our first educator asked, have you experienced imposter syndrome? And if so, how do you manage to turn the doubt into a positive?
Right. Great question. I mean, have I encountered imposter syndrome? Absolutely. I mean, if anyone in this circle here hasn't encountered that, then I'd be questioning the size of your ego. You've got to be able to sit there and question yourself sometimes and think about your impact. I think it's less of a syndrome and more that sometimes you get those thoughts, those thoughts that come into your mind, imposter thoughts that make you question, you know, the decisions you've made. And you really should be doing that. You should be thinking, you know, I've done this. This has been the impact. Has it been the best outcome? Should I be thinking about something different? Do I need to be responding to that now? But I think, you know, it's different from being self-reflective and then being self-deprecating, where, you know, those negative thoughts can really hold you back from taking that next step in your career. So if you are an exceptional teacher, and you're really passionate about education and your colleagues are coming to you, you're the one that they ask the questions to because they look up to you and you want to take that next step, but it's the thoughts that are holding you back. I think that's really something that you've got to push through those barriers and be able to say, you know what, I've got these strengths, and at the end of the day, I can give it a go. And sometimes great teachers don't make great leaders. Sometimes they don't enjoy the process. Sometimes they don't enjoy being the one who has to hold the accountability meetings and have those difficult conversations. But you only really know that when you put yourself forward. So I think, you know, you've got to make sure if you do have imposter thoughts that they don't present with very negative behavior. Because some of the things that you'll encounter sometimes when someone has insecurities in leadership is they become very, you know, they come across very decisive, and then they will say, you know, do it my way or the highway sort of thing, as opposed to saying it can be a dialogue. But at the end of the day, somebody has to make a decision here and moving forward, and we can reflect on this and come back to it and all that sort of thing. You know, and having difficult conversations with people where you're having a face-to-face discussion as opposed to, you know, the email bandits and things like that. You know, that's the sort of thing that sometimes presents when you have insecurities as a leader and you're not wanting that confrontational part of leadership. So I think you've always got to be reflecting, thinking about how you are carrying yourself as a leader. Am I making the decisions based on, you know, the moral compass of the students? Am I doing this because I feel a certain way about this person, or am I doing this because it's in the best interest of the school? So always do check yourself and always do think, you know, am I making the right decision here? And is this in the best interest of the school?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. Not everybody who is a great teacher is meant then for leadership, especially if they're, you know, really experiencing some of those insecurities that you mentioned. The second question that we had was a really interesting question. How have you shown resilience from a failure?
Which one? I mean, I think there's, over the course of my career, I would have dropped the ball many times. But I think from every time that I've encountered one of those challenges, or I have, had an issue with hitting KPIs or anything like that, I'm a very self-reflective person. So it is about thinking about moving forward. But I'll give you an example of, the first time I was a founding principal when I opened up a school, and I was determined to come in very strong and make sure I set a very clear vision, had very high standards. We're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And, it is one of those moments where you do have to be quite decisive and very, very clear about what you're expecting from your team. It's not really an opportunity for everyone to have input at that stage, because it's a new school. You've kind of got to start somewhere, and then you've got to be able to sort of reflect and come back to it. But I think I was very driven, and I really did expect so much from my staff. And by the end of the year, I had about 30% of my staff leave. As a result of the pressures and all of the exit interviews. It was workload, 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 no life balance, all those sort of things came up repeatedly. And I had to say to myself, like, what have I done wrong this year that I need to do differently next year? And how am I going to find that balance? And, what was presenting from me, from my leadership team, that was causing this turnover, because we also onboarded a whole load of new students. And so we had additional staff anyway. So we ended up with 50% of the school starting from scratch, which, as you know, is very, very challenging. You want to hold on. That retention really makes such an impact year on year. So I went on a journey with my staff. I did my master's in education, and I did an action research project with mindfulness, and looked at, the levels of depression, anxiety, and stress that the staff had that I worked with. And I could see, some of those levels were so high. And there were people that were just coming to work and smiling and saying hi to you in the corridor, and you would never know that they had really high levels of depression. And yet, they were coming in and doing their best job. And here I was, just pushing everyone to the limit and to the edge. And so I was contributing to that as opposed to supporting it. So it was really just opened my eyes to my leadership, and creating that balance and putting well-being. There you go, Glenn, I mentioned it. At the forefront of your mind, when you're finding that balance, because high standards are absolutely expected, but we also need to make sure we hold ourselves to a high standard when it comes to the well-being of the team. So that's my answer.
Yeah. Thank you. Incredibly open and honest and reflective of your experiences. Thank you so much for sharing that, Nicki. Another question we had: do you have any advice on establishing yourself as a younger leader? It feels like an unspoken barrier.
I think Glenn spoke to this a little bit. When you're going for an interview, you're interviewing the interviewers too, right? So if you go into an organization and you can see that there are, 8 people on the panel, and they're all men and they're all over 50, and you're a young woman trying to make it in the school, you're maybe going to have some difficulty. You've got to look at the makeup of that school. Is there diversity in the team? Can you see that there are different experience levels? Do people get those opportunities? But there are also questions that you ask the people that are interviewing you, right? So you've been interviewed, and at the end of that interview, I'm a passionate teacher. This is where I am in my career, but I just want to let you know that actually this is what I'm looking for. And am I going to have opportunities in the future to be able to grow within the organization? Because then you can make your decisions from that as well. And then once you're in a school and you feel like those opportunities are available, then it's about being the person that stands out because you are a proactive member of the team. Don't just stick in your box. Don't do just what your job description says, but, go outside of those boundaries and offer up opportunities for, whole school development. What can I step up and do? How can I join another professional learning committee? Or how can I get involved in something that's going to help support progress and attainment in a different grade level to my grade level? Push your boundaries and open up those opportunities, and people will naturally see you in the school making an impact and being proactive. And there's nothing nothing more than I love is someone who wants to step into middle leadership, who shows all of that passion and proactivity to push the school forward. And when they come in for the interview process and be able to present on that, you actually have some tangible data to say, well, I got involved with this initiative and this is the impact that I've had up until now. So now I want to be able to move forward on that. You will have schools that stay pretty stagnant. So, you know, if it's one of those schools where the leadership team don't leave and those opportunities don't become available, then you do need to be looking elsewhere as well.
Yeah, thank you. Really good sage advice, especially, yeah, those kind of, yeah, in that situation where they feel maybe that they don't have a lot of representation in the school that they're considering moving into. And time for just one more question we could squeeze in. How do you manage the workload as a senior leader? How do you set boundaries?
That's something that's still a work in progress for me. I think, no, it is really important. But like I said, it's also about me as a person. That's something that I am quite passionate about, is really getting things done in the way that works for me. And sometimes that means I do put in hours after work, but that's not something that I expect from my team. When I'm, you know, setting up a school, I will set a standard that communication happens from 6 to 6, or it happens from 7 to 4, or whatever the boundaries are that you want to set, and everybody adheres to that. We don't contact each other on the weekend. The only exception would be, you know, you've got an inspection coming up, everyone's in on the weekend, everyone's getting set up and things like that. But I think you set the expectation as a leader. You're the one who's the role model. You don't do those communications, and then the team will follow suit. But it's also about being strategic. It's about being organized and making sure that you have carefully planned and scheduled yourself, because there's nothing that anyone hates more than someone who is disorganized and throws last minute deadlines at you and get this done and get this done. Because if you are an organized person, that's the kind of thing that can push your stress and your anxiety over the edge. So it is about making sure that you've planned your year out. There will be things that come up, but that you are realistic about when you want staff to complete tasks. And for myself as well, it's about very much planning that time and making sure that we don't you know, overdo things or overburden the calendar and the schedule, and keep it even and balanced.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time and your reflections, Nicki. Really valuable advice in there. Thank you. So now we're going to move on to our next speaker. And so we are going to be talking to Philip Stainton. Oh, sorry, I've just clicked. There we go. Right then. So Philip is currently Deputy Head at New Cairo British International School, with a proven track record as an educational leader in both the UK and international markets, and experience of both established secondary and founding all through boarding schools. As part of SLT, Philip has led schools through a host of different inspections and accreditations, is a COBIS peer accreditor and instructional coach. Also, as a fellow of the Chartered College of Teaching, Philip values well-researched, evidence-based approaches to pedagogy. Positive, dynamic and progressive by nature, integrity is a key part of his leadership. And from August 2024, Philip will be Vice Principal and Head of Secondary at Arcadia Global School, Dubai. Welcome, Philip.
Hi, I feel the same as Nicki. My intro was a bit too long. I feel like I should have shortened that down a bit and made that a bit more succinct. But good afternoon, and really looking forward to speaking to all of you. So I'm going to do my best and share my screen now. So hopefully you're going to see the host disabled participant screen sharing. Is that able to be enabled so I can share my screen?
You're on mute there, Claire.
There we go. Sorry, Philip. I'll just see if I can allow you to do this here. Yes, right. Okay, I can click here and make co-host and see if this now works.
Yes.
Yes. Wonderful.
Okay. Hopefully you can all see that now.
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, so thank you very much for taking the time to join this call and listen today. So I'm going to be talking about ethical behaviors and building culture as a leader. Nothing I'm going to say today is a guaranteed pathway to success at all. I'm certainly not going to tell you how to do it, but hopefully I'm going to give you, through my experience, some ideas and thoughts that you could take away from today. So when I started teaching, which feels like many years ago now, every single school I walked into had values. And if I'm being completely honest, I thought they were quite tokenistic. A slogan on a website, something in the corridors, a sign by reception. I didn't really take much notice of them, if I'm being honest. It was only when I started into middle leadership and into senior leadership that I understood that they really took on a real importance, and that unless the school embodies these values, it's not able to meet its aims and be a success. And just for reference, here are some of the values that of the different schools that I've kind of worked in, and they all have various different ranges of words that are full spectrum that you could imagine there is. For those of you that are in the UK or have worked in the UK, these now are very familiar in terms of the Nolan principles of ethical behavior and leadership. So with all the different values of the schools and these Nolan principles, it's sometimes hard to know where to start. If you were to volley some values in terms of a leader, where do you start to begin? Well, I'm going to steal a bit from Glen's presentation where he talked about this guy, Simon Sinek, and I like to go back to this. So when I talk to potential leaders, Simon Sinek talks about trust having two dimensions, competence and integrity. We forgive mistakes of competence, but mistakes of integrity are harder to overcome. A quote like this really resonates with me, and therefore, for all my actions, I always try and maintain that high level of integrity through. He actually takes it a step further, and when looking at how Navy SEALs recruit for their teams, where they have to have a high level of elite performance with a high level of trust when operating, he shows us in a simple graph you can see on the left-hand side of high trust against high performance. Now, when he had conversations with the Navy SEALs recruitment teams, they often found that they would rather hire a person with a slightly lower level of performance, but a high level of trust than the other way around. For them to be an effective team and to have the right culture, this was more important than having a maverick with an elite level performance, but they could disrupt the team. So for a bit of fun, he then kind of laid them out into Marvel avatars, into the different areas. And I'll leave that for you to decide who in your team may be those ones. But why is this important? Well, if we're to put ourselves in the viewpoint of the person hiring, and if you're a senior leader, you are recruiting for a school. Like Glen and Nicki said, I've been a founding SLT in a school, and I'm moving to one that's going to be setting up too. If we value trust and integrity really highly, then what are they going to be looking for if you're putting yourself in the viewpoint of the person hiring? Now, apologies for anyone who's not a football fan, but I am a big sports person myself, and I find the world of elite level sport and the high stakes nature of it really fascinating. And this guy on the screen here, Pep Guardiola, led the Barcelona football team to massive successes. But when he entered the team, he found highly skilled, highly professional, proficient players with high performance, but with a really poor culture. Every week, players were leaking negative press stories about the team and the poor element to it. And he recognized that the culture needed to change to have a cohesiveness in the team. So to change this, he went pretty ruthlessly, went about recognizing which members of his team would he maintain and keep and which ones wouldn't. And the way he went about that was a very simple exercise. Every single time Barcelona scored a goal, he looked at the substitutes bench and recognized which ones were cheering on the team and which ones weren't. And the ones that weren't, he very quickly recognized that they weren't on the bus with him altogether, and he quickly moved them on. Now, similarly, as a Manchester United fan, this is very painful to talk about with Jurgen Klopp, but he found the same element when he went into Liverpool football team. And he recently, as he retired from there, laid out a succession of points that he did to lay the groundwork of how to be successful in terms of leading a team. And whilst they are football related, I actually find them very relevant to leading, whether you're a middle leader, a senior leader, pastoral, academic, whole school, boarding, executive leadership. It really goes across the range. So I'm going to go through a succession of things that he did that you might find useful that he set about in terms of building and leading a culture change. So one was creating an environment where it's okay to make mistakes. We all want our teams to try new teaching initiatives, even within lesson observation. That would be fantastic. And know that the feedback from us as leaders will be constructive. For example, if you've got a selected group in a school that's underperforming, rather than continue your usual teaching style, try a new intervention to solve this problem. But note that a lack of effort is completely unacceptable and will not be tolerated. I feel a bit in line with Nicki here of setting high standards and just continuing with that and driving that forward. And I agree with Nicki that at times I've had to reflect and slow down and bring my team with me more. But really what he's pushing on here is the impetus that you have to have hard work from everyone, and there has to be an impetus to problem solve. Deliver a strategic plan, really prioritize exactly what you want and how you're going to get there. This doesn't need to be a top-down approach from the principal or the CEO from that matter. I often ask my middle leaders, what do you want your department to be known for? If it's to be excellent teaching and learning, then plan, prioritize, and make it happen. Hire specialists in the areas you're unsure of. If you'll only accept that high effort and you have a clear plan, then trust and allow your team members to thrive. And if you don't have those specialists already, then through recruitment, hire them. Cultivate a proper sense of purpose, or as we often say in education, buy-in. Relationships is key. Winning together is more rewarding than winning alone, but often it produces better results. Focus on the fundamentals. Whilst Jurgen Klopp often asks his teammates or his new recruits about training and running, fitness being a fundamental of football, why not ask new teacher recruits their thoughts on marking and the importance of it? If they say they don't like it, but it's a necessary policy from SLT, then is that really someone you want to bring into your team or your school? Or would you hire someone if you were that way round? Would these football managers take them on board? If they understood from research the importance of feedback and deliberate practice and that marking can be an effective tool, and then they gave an answer on the lines of, I give quality feedback regularly through marking because I know that when students enact upon it, they make great progress. Wouldn't you want that person in your team instead? And lastly, detailed orientation. Well, good will always only be good enough. As a leader, you'll encounter endless data, progress safe in the UK, value added, CAP 4, GL, pass, the list goes on and on. How do you turn that data collected into useful actions that link back to your strategic plan? And lastly, if you manage to put all these things together, and then you are really the creme de la creme of leadership, if you manage to do that, because I think we'll all admit that we make mistakes through all of these things. I tend to stick by Richard Branson's famous quote of train people well enough so they can leave, but treat them well enough so they don't have to. Integrity is key in everything you do. I know Glenn highlighted that towards the end of his presentation, and that resonates everything through me as well. So thank you very much for your time listening. I'll share back the screen back to Claire, and possibly there may be a few questions from this.
Thank you, Philip. Just to remind everyone as well, please do drop questions in the chat and we can take any kind of live questions as well, kind of responsive to these different presentations. But like I said previously, we had so many questions come in from all of our registration forms. So Philip, the first question I had for you, what is the best way to gain respect from your team?
Good question. It doesn't matter what level you're leading at. Acting with integrity is everything you need to do. We all make mistakes and we get things wrong. And being open and honest about that is the first step. But as long as you can lay your head in your pillow at night, resting your conscience, knowing that you've made the right decision in the best interest of the students in your school, then you're not going to go wrong, really. Being a role model to your team is important. I like to believe that I never asked someone to do something I wouldn't be willing to do myself. And I stand by Nicki there. In terms of founding schools, you are doing everything when you're the leader, but you have to make sure that a role model, that you set those parameters too for your own teams in terms of, as Nicki mentioned, that highlighted the communication, being open and approachable, and being proficient and competent at your job. Those are the key things I would say.
Yeah, Yeah, thank you, Philip. I think we've got time for just one more quick question before we're going to jump over to our final speaker. How do we support our middle leaders with the leadership skills they needed to succeed in more senior roles?
Feel a bit like Nick Clegg back in how many years ago now? I keep saying I agree with Nicki. She mentioned about, I'm sure I agree with Glenn as well. She mentioned about having fantastic role models that she was very fortunate to be part of and recognizing. And I feel the same, that I had fantastic role models in my time that I learned so much from. And I don't just mean in terms of knowledge and skills, but just the way you act, the way you come to decisions, the way you communicate. If we're talking about, you know, upskilling our middle leaders, where you have professional qualifications that Glenn's spoken about, they often deal in the skills and knowledge, and the hardest part often is judgment, or how and when to make that call. And that's something that really comes through experience and with role models above you. And if you are fortunate enough to work in outstanding schools, then that kind of outstanding nature gets, through osmosis and culturation, gets brought into you. And if you don't have that pathway, that can be harder for you initially to get. Instructional coaching is fantastic, and that's really been a big push through schools. And I guess if there's something practical to helping middle leaderships, it's putting in those SLT experiences. I've had plenty of middle leaders shadow me for a day or an afternoon or part of decisions, and they get to see what that's like. And I guess that mirrors what Glenn said about what a year one would say what a principal does, what a middle leader says what a principal does, and what an executive leader might say what a principal does.
Thank you so much for your time, Philip. I'm going to jump straight over to our next speaker now. Thank you. Okay. And I'm going to click on here. Okay, and so our final speaker today is Matt Hall. Philip just mentioned instructional coaching being a really key part for developing those skills for senior leadership, which leads us really nicely into Matt Hall and what he does at Making Stuff Better. So Matt is the director at Making Stuff Better. They are the world's leading provider of executive coaching and coach training for international schools, supporting over 280 senior leaders in more than 400 schools worldwide. Matt has a unique perspective on international school leadership, and in this session we'll be foregrounding the research MSB are currently undertaking on future leadership literacies in the international sector. Over to you, Matt. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me. And yeah, I think I need to share my screen as well.
Okay.
That's right, Claire.
Yeah.
And just a really important distinction on Philip's point in your introduction, we do coaching. We don't do instructional coaching.
Apologies.
We don't, but I do think instructional coaching is great, and there's lots of organizations that do it really well. We're just not one of them. We stick with leaders. So yeah, we're about to undertake with Oxford University a piece of research that starts to, if you can predict, we're trying to, what skills, values, literacies, as we call them, international school leaders may need as we think about the evolving education market sector over the next 20 to 30 years. I'm really mindful of time, so I'm just going to finish us, I think, with maybe a provocation that might, you know, for the people that are thinking that in the next 2 years, 3 years, maybe 10 years, they may be moving into leadership, and maybe in 20 years' time, they may be running the schools that other of the panelists are running. What might that look like? And with the massive asterisks of, can we really predict it? I'm not sure. But we're doing it because we work with a lot of international school leaders, and we see it as us as having a responsibility to help them do that thinking, because it's very hard for them to find the time to think big and think long in the busyness of the day jobs that everyone's described. So here we go. This is deliberately, let me just get on the right slide. Let me just share my screen. Deliberately maybe, and I had, as always, 4 million slides, but I should have remembered going last means
yeah, sorry, Matt. I'm just going
to
say, if everyone doesn't mind, I think we'll probably run over just by 5 minutes, just to give you the opportunity to run through this a little bit more, because it's obviously such a worthwhile session.
Great. So I'm going to ask you to do an activity, actually, as we finish, and I'm going to ask my fellow panelists, and Claire and Max, you can do it too. Just take, if you can, grab a piece of paper and a pen, if you've got that to hand, and if you haven't, do it on your phone, I don't mind. You need to be able to freely write and draw. And on that piece of paper, just draw a line down the middle, and on the left, write present economy, and on the right, future economy. So it looks exactly like my screen. Just take a minute to do that. We're going to feel our way through this idea. And if you're joining us as a guest, then please do the same. Just grab a piece of paper, draw a column down the middle, present economy on one side, future economy. There's no pass or fail criteria, although Claire is clearly indicating that she's worthy of the top set already. And then I'm just going to ask you to kind of use your imagination slightly. But this one's fairly straightforward because you've got lots of data points. So I just want you to think about our present economy, the way in which the majority of the world runs now. And obviously our education system is absolutely intertwined with that economy. So the way in which the world currently operates in most of the world, if you just think about, just bring that to mind, our current economy. You don't need to write anything or say draw anything yet. And then I'd like you to just kind of drop out of your head and into your, I would say into your body, but into your heart a bit, where your feelings are. And just take a moment to think about, what does that feel like? What does the present, to live and work in the present economy, to educate in the present economy, what's the feeling? What's the predominant feeling? And caveat, and this normally takes about half an hour, and we're doing it in about 3 minutes. The last thing I want you to do then, just in that left-hand column, is with your pen, just draw, make a shape, do something with your pen that expresses what that feeling is. But there's one rule, and one is, once you start drawing, you can't take your pen off the paper. So in one movement, just find some way of expressing how you feel about the present economy. That's it. Don't overthink it. Don't try and get it right or wrong. Just do whatever comes to mind or whatever comes in your gut. Okay, and yeah, we're going to carry on, just mindful of time. Okay. All right, pause that. Now I'm going to ask you to think forward and think about a future economy. And because I'm really lucky, or maybe I'm really unlucky, I don't know, because I work with lots of leaders around the world, I get the kind of opportunity to play and imagine, and I'm free of the realities sometimes that people running schools are. So indulge me in this a minute. But I want you just to imagine a future economy, and that future economy works for everyone, everything who's part of it. It is a future economy that works for all that contribute to that economy and are educated in that economy. And we could even go so far as say it works for everything. It works for the natural environment. It works for non-humans. It is a way of existing on the planet, a way of educating on the planet that works for everyone and everything. And again, you know the rules now, or you know the process. Just bring that to mind, then say, well, what does that feel like? Okay, if I imagine being in that place, what does it feel like? And then once that feeling is kind of there, again, don't overcomplicate it. Same thing, just create a shape, put something on the paper in that column without taking your pen off the paper. So in one movement, just create a shape. Good job, well done. Okay, why on earth are we doing this? So I'm going to explain in a minute, I promise. So in the chat, for those of you that are on the chat, I'd love you just to describe in a sentence what you've got in the present economy column. And for those of you that have got a camera, I'd love for you to show us.
Guys, we'll just have to use the Q&A there, yeah? If you
sorry, in the Q&A, just describe your present economy. And Glenn, Philip, Claire, don't know if Nicky's still there, but if you're still there, then show us the camera what you got for the present economy. Hold it close. Oh, we can't quite see yours, Claire, as it's blurry. And you're on mute. There we go. Okay, thanks, Glenn.
Downward arrow minus.
Okay, so I would wager we've done this experiment with loads of the heads that we work with, and it's also, but it's not my experiment. It's from the Future Post-Growth Institute's experiment. They've done it with thousands and thousands of people from all walks of life. I would wager that you have got something in your present economy that looks a little bit like this, or thereabouts. And again, give us a yes or yeah, bleak, thrive, chaos, a beating heart. Thank you. And then I would wager that in your future economy, you've maybe got something that looks a little bit like that. Glenn, can you show us yours again? There we go. Thank you. So there's a kind of collective understanding in us as humans that when we think about the present, it feels a little bit like the bottom row. And when we think and feel about the future, we know that some sort of shift needs to happen that makes it start to feel and look a bit like the top. And what does this mean for us as educators? Well, for the work that we're doing and the research that we've started, the best framework that is emerging is this idea of leading schools as regenerative spaces. So leaders of future schools, future education organizations, need to think in a way that ensures that regeneration is happening within their organization. And what do I even mean by that? What I mean is that we shift away from this growth, everything better every year. And we move from a mechanistic view of the world and the way in which the world works and the way in which our schools work. And we move to a more systems approach to our leadership. So the emerging research, and this is based a lot on a study done a couple of years ago by UNESCO, who did a huge research into the future of education and what's required, is that we are going to be moving from what you call a reductive machine logic, where you just think in very rigid patterns around power and hierarchy, to a much more living systems logic. And I'm going to jump all the way through and say, well, what does that mean? What does that mean for you as a leader? I think it means three things. The first is the ability to create health in your system, the ability to create regeneration in your system. The second, we've touched on this already, is to be able to recognize when you need to regenerate yourself. So your ability, the well-being word, the ability to be able to repair and renew yourself. And then the third, really simply, is the ability to be able to be in conversation and have creative and productive conversations with those that you work with. We already touched on coaching slightly in this session. So I could talk about this for hours. I'm going to pause there because I'm mindful that we ran out of time. But when we start to go forward, I hope we go all the way back that this slide, and there's plenty of research done on this. There's some really good research done by Giles Hutchins, for example, who's really writing at the forefront of this. But I'm hoping this might start to get you thinking about what might be needed in the schools of the future and in the leaders of the future.